It's been a privilege to know so many leaders in the railway industry over the years, internationally as well as in my home country of the UK. And it's impossible to pick a favourite in that list. Everybody's so different. But right at the upper echelons of any list would be today's guest on Green Signals, Andy Byford. Andy's list of jobs is quite extraordinary. He's been operations director of Rail Corp in New South Wales in Australia, CEO of the Toronto Transit Commission, CEO of New York Mass Transit Authority, and of course, Commissioner for Transport at Transport for London here in the UK. There have been some massive highs. Getting the Crossrail project finished that became the Elizabeth line and getting that Elizabeth line open and sorting out the Toronto Transit Commission, which inherited in a real state and turned it around into North America's best transit authority, R2. But there's been some real challenges as well. The last year and the end of his tenure at New York being a good example of that. In this interview, Andy talks openly and honestly about every stage of his career, including from his early days at school and university, right through to his present role, responsible for the high-speed rail programs in Amtrak in the United States. What comes across, though, is his real passion and determination for really getting the basics right, for leading from the front and from backing his people, whatever the role, however large the organization, and in the face of whatever attack is coming. It's a truly inspirational story of leadership. We're delighted that Andy was able to join us on Green Signals, Britain's premier railway podcast. If you're new to the channel, please do like this video and please do subscribe to the channel as well. It enables us to grow and provide loads more content like this, whether it's interviews or magazine shows or out and about around the railway. But now, sit back and enjoy a really comprehensive access all areas interview with a really remarkable railway leader. Andy Byford. It is such a joy to welcome you to Green Signals. I can't tell you. Do you realise, I mean, of all the guests we've had on, we've had some great guests, but you are the person I think I've known the longest of all in this sector. And I'm sure we'll come on to that in due course. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, Rich, it's great to see you. I mean, as I'm sure we'll cover, paths have crossed multiple times, either directly or indirectly. So I'm really looking forward to the chat. Thanks for having me on.
It's a real pleasure. I'm going to go right back to the beginning, if I may, and start with a football thing, if I may, because I know you grew up in Plymouth. You're a Plymouth Argyle fan. You know, and so
Absolutely.
therefore join that happy band of brothers who follow very unfashionable teams, really. Is that where you were born, or is that just where you grew up? And what was the connection with Plymouth, Argyle?
Sure. We moved about a lot when I was very young. My dad was in insurance. I was actually born on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. So, but we didn't live on the island. We lived in just on the mainland, but we only lived there for 6 months. So technically, I guess you should be a Gills fan, because I always think you should support your local team. But my formative years, from fairly early age, where I went to I think infant school and junior school, but then definitely comprehensive, was just outside Plymouth. I grew up in a village called Newton Ferrers. I went to Ivybridge Comprehensive, and my dad took me to Argyle for the first time in 1978. Classic team, really, just after Paul Mariner had left to go to Ipswich. But I was smitten, and this, bear in mind, Rich, was these days those times were where everyone, all my contemporaries, were wearing Liverpool, Villa, Forest shirts. And I remember where I really got into it was then in 1980. I saw 2 games in a row. We demolished Carlisle 4-1. We then demolished, funnily enough, Gillingham 4-1. I went straight to the club shop. I bought a scarf. I think I've still got it. I bought a shirt. I wore it to games at Ivybridge. Everyone ridiculed me. I remember the games teacher saying, "You don't waste your time going there, do you?" And now, 46 years on, I'm still a passionate Argyle fan. I still have a season ticket, and I'm a
No.
proud member of what's called Argyle USA, which is a USA-based bunch of fans. We watch the games on Zoom every Saturday, including our chairman, actually, who's a Brit, but he lives in between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So, yeah, Argyle USA.
It's amazing. What is it about football? I know this is a railway podcast, but let's just indulge ourselves for a minute. What is it about football that 46 years since you can still remember the
Yeah.
scores of two pivotal games? I mean, I'm a Blackburn fan. Similar
Mm-hmm.
sort of journey to you, really. First game, 3-0. We beat Crystal Palace. I thought, this is fantastic. I mean, I'm going back the same time, about 1979, I think, 1980. We beat them 3-0. I thought, this is marvellous. Of course, we got relegated that year. What is it about we remember these things? Do you think it's that sort of social interaction?
Yeah.
We just create sort of memories for life, doesn't it?
It does. Well, I think it's kind of tribal in a way.
Yeah.
You're so passionate about your team, and also for me, there's a massive connection to Plymouth. I'm very proud of having grown up in Plymouth. I feel that it's a somewhat neglected part of the world politically. I'm very heavily involved in trying to get Plymouth City Airport reopened. I'm a member of Fly Plymouth, which I don't have to do, obviously, but I feel passionately about the city. I feel that it's been overlooked by successive administrations, and I advocate strongly for it. But on the football side, I kept my season ticket because, one, it's my way to support the club. It's really not that much money. It sounds profligate, but Argyle aren't that big a team. Two, you've got that that history of highs and lows. I can think of massive highs supporting Argyle, but also some real lows. It's not like supporting Man City. We don't win every week. I also really like the people I sit with or generally stand with in the Devonport end.
Of course.
We have a laugh. I turn up. They always ask me what I've been up to. And being a member of Argyle USA, a little prop here, friends of mine or my buddies said, we need to have a nickname for when we get together in Washington, D.C. What should it be? And various people were putting up nicknames, or Argyle Yankees or various other things. Well, people from Plymouth are known as Janners. And so I just thought, that gives me an idea. So we are, and this was my idea, probably the best thing I've ever done in my career, if I say so myself, Star Spangled Janners, right? Because you
Brilliant.
think of it, the US national anthem, that's us, the Star Spangled Janners. And in DC, we had a blast with all of that. Yeah, that's my passion. Plymouth Argyle. I've got my own little man cave here in our little home in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it's Argyle all the way.
Fantastic. Well, for those who are listening on audio, you wouldn't have seen Andy just held up this fantastic sort of scarf there. We'll put a picture of that on the website as well, because that's brilliant. I saw that this year, I suppose just after the end of the season, a slightly cheeky meme that said last year Plymouth Argyle really struggled to stay in the league, almost got relegated. But this year you've decided to do it properly and you've appointed Wayne Rooney as your manager.
Well, let me just say, look, when I first heard about it, I thought that can't be serious. No way. There's no way. But, actually, the more I hear about it, I'm actually quite excited about it. I've renewed my season ticket. Bring it on. I'm going to get right behind it.
You.
Rooney. It's going to be a whole new era. I'm right up for it. Get on, Wayne.
It'll be exciting, if nothing else. Then you moved on from Plymouth and went to the University of Leicester, where, ironically, of course, our paths may well have crossed. We did different degrees at the time. I was there exactly the same time as you. But what a great place. I mean, do you have happy memories of Leicester?
Very much so. Very much so. I'm very proud to be an alumnus of the University of Leicester. As you say, not necessarily the most fashionable. It tends to fly below the radar, but I think it also punches above its weight. Leicester's got a very impressive list of achievements. And I went there from 1985 to 1989, 4 years. My third year, because I'm a linguist, I studied modern languages, French and German. I lived in France for a year, which was fantastic. But we were near neighbours, my friend. I lived in Stamford in Oadby, and you lived across the road in Digby, if I remember rightly. And
Correct.
So I'm sure we stood at the bar together. And we've probably been to the odd gig at the Percy G, the Student Union building on campus. It was great. Really formative years. I've made lifelong friends. I think it brought me out of my shell. I was probably a bit shy at the time. I wouldn't have done this kind of thing all those years ago, but very happy days. Really enjoyed Leicester. It's a fabulous institution.
Yeah, I know my memories are exactly the same. And as you say, there was a lot happening. I mean, it's incredible. We were there 85. I was there 85, 88. You did the extra because you did a sandwich degree. You had the year abroad. That was the time when Alex Jeffreys was developing
Hmm.
DNA fingerprinting. You know, and it was
Absolutely.
quite a cool place to be associated with.
It
So no, look.
was.
So you got a linguistic degree. You're a highly accomplished French and German speaker. So of course you ended up going to work for a railway company. How? What was the connection with London Underground? Why go there particularly?
Yeah, sure. Look, initially, before I went to university, having grown up in Plymouth, we still own an apartment there. Uh, I used to watch the Royal Navy going in and out of Devonport. I remember standing on Plymouth Hoe when the Falklands fleet steamed out to go down to the
Wow.
Falklands, and when they came back and they were given a hero's welcome coming back into Devonport. The tragedy being, of course, a couple of the ships never came back. So I thought long and hard about the Navy, but in the end decided to go to university. And then, of course, it came to be decision time. What am I going to do? Thought about the Foreign Office, thought about various things. But my family is steeped in London transport history. We have between um, London General, the forerunner to LT on the bus side, London Transport, and then TfL. We have 160 years worth of service. I'm very, very proud of that, including my granddad on my dad's side, who was a bus driver through the Blitz, and we still got his long service award. He drove through the Blitz from Loughton Garage. He went to from Loughton to Victoria, and some nights he never came home. And my granny thought, "Oh my God, he's dead," but he wasn't. He just couldn't get through the streets. And something I'll come back to when we talk about TfL. There was a famous poster on TfL that said "London Transport kept going,"
Yeah.
and so for me, there is that family connection. So I went to a careers fair, and on the day of a tube strike, funnily enough, I had to walk from Paddington to Islington, which is no short
Hmm.
distance. I walked up to a rather harassed-looking LUL recruitment person who thought I was coming to have a go about the strike, but I said to him, "I'm really interested in the career in the tube, and particularly with the operations stream. Obviously, you went through the finance stream."
Yeah.
And I was made an offer. So the rest is history. I had 14 and a half actually, very happy years at London Underground.
It was a wonderful place. I mean, do you remember the? I mean, we are being a bit self-indulgent here, but what the heck? Do you remember we when you went for those graduate schemes, you had that couple of days down at, was it Flagstaff House down in Walton on
Flagstaff,
Thames?
Walton on Thames. I
Yeah,
remember it well,
that was
and
tough, wasn't
quite the
it?
grueling
It
selection
was.
process with those in-tray exercises, and
Yeah,
you know you were, and also what made it doubly stressful in some ways was you were there with a bunch of other people all competing for a finite number of jobs.
yeah.
So everyone was being all very polite and nice to each other, but it was absolutely competitive.
It was.
So I remember coming away from it thinking 50-50. I'm not sure if I got the job. And I was delighted when I got the offer letter. Yeah, and of course, subsequently, you went back to Flaggy for various meetings, team meetings, etc. I remember going back as a train service manager years later. But yeah, Flagstaff House, quite the memory.
One of the wonderful things about those graduate schemes at London Underground was you didn't suddenly find yourself in some sort of ivory tower. You were sort of thrust straight into it. I mean, my first placement, having got the graduate scheme, was into head office accounts, where it was like rows of ledger clerks, and I did all the intercompany transfers. I presume you must have had a similar experience. It's like, welcome to the graduate scheme, now go and do that job.
Well, go and do that in my case, because I was in the operations stream, was something I'm very proud of. You were assigned to, or you had to go out in a frontline position. So I went to the then recruitment center. Actually, the uniform store used to be at Park Royal, and I remember lining up. And you're just one of all the other recruits. Doesn't matter. You're a graduate trainee. I didn't even mention that; is irrelevant. And you were. It was quite militaristic back in those days. You were called forward, and literally this guy would say Byford, and then they would bark at you, and they'd say. Shirt size. Well, I knew that 15.5-inch collar, right? Pant. Oh, sorry. This living in America. Trousers. What the trousers? Okay, I could just about get that. Then he said to me, hat. I haven't got a clue. I've no idea what my hat size is. So he just picked up a station foreman's hat, which I still have, and threw it at me and said, try that on, but didn't wait for me to try it on, called the next person. I then had to wear it because back in the day you had to wear a hat. I put that hat on. I would wear it for 8 hours. I would take it off at the end of my shift as a station foreman, and I would have a big ring around my forehead, which is I should sue LUL because that's probably why I lost all my hair. But I really am proud to have started at the bottom. I was a station foreman at Regent's Park on the Bakerloo line, and I think if nothing else, that has embedded in my psyche an absolute respect for and appreciation of and empathy with my frontline colleagues. I've always stuck up for my troops, and I always will, because I was one of those persons. I know it's what it's like to be surrounded by angry customers. I've been there, done that, right?
Yeah.
So I was a graduate trainee, but station foreman to begin with.
One of the lovely things about those programs, again, though, they moved you around, didn't they? So you didn't sort of just spend 5 minutes doing one thing. I know I had quite a few placements, but one of the roles I remember you had, because actually it was one of the times we came into contact with each other, you were PA for a while for Ian Arthurton, who is the passenger services director, effectively the ops director, I guess. I was sort of similar for David Bailey, the development director, around the same time. You used to occasionally get sort of called up to the seventh floor, which was the eerie, sort of the lofty heights. And people probably think it was because you were scared of bumping into the chairman or the managing director at the time, but it wasn't actually. It was
Pearl.
Pearl. It was Pearl.
Pearl.
So Pearl was the secretary to chairman, and she was absolutely terrifying. I mean, you must have had more than the odd brush with Pearl.
Well, Pearl, I would describe as the doyenne of London transport, or the London, what was it, London regional transport back in the day. She ruled the roost, and she was chairman's PA, and she let you know that. And along with Kathleen Piggott, who was secretary to the managing director, Dennis Tunnicliffe, and Nora Kelly, who was the company secretary, they were the triumvirate. They were three people that you were very respectful to, and rightly so. They'd been there a long time, but you certainly didn't mess them about. So I was Mr. Arthurton's PA, a legendary figure to me, known as Rimmer, because his full name was it was R.I.M. Arthurton. And so Ian, among many jobs, Ian asked me to oversee the Station Gardens competition, which is a fabulous institution, still continues to this day. And so one of my jobs was, once the judging had happened, we figured out who the winners were. You had to get the certificates signed, but you also had to have the photos attached to the certificates, etc., etc. And it's always a mad rush to get it done before the ceremony. So the certificates turned up, the photos weren't yet ready. I went up in some trepidation to the hallowed corridors, the oak-clad corridors with the big, thick, lush velvet, sort of reddish carpet, up to the chairman's office. And Pearl took one look at these certificates and she said, "Oh, chairman won't like that." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Well, because they don't have the certificates on. Chairman likes to look at the certificates. Likes to look at the pictures before
right.
he signs. Take them away and come back when you've got the photos." Now, this gave me a real dilemma because I didn't have time for that. So I ended up pleading with the photography company to get me the photos, but we pulled it off. We had them all done in time, and the rest is history. The idea that one day I would end up effectively as chairman's successor, as the commissioner, still blows my mind. I'm very proud to be on that list.
And it should blow your mind. It is an amazing story, and I can't wait to when we get to talk about the TfL. You had an amazing career at the Underground. So you'd done these various placements, but you ended up, I know, in a very senior role as general manager for service delivery for not one line, but a whole group of lines. It was Bakerloo, wasn't it? Central, Victoria. I mean, a serious role. I mean, what was that like? That early days of being a station foreman and seeing it, full on must have really stood you in good stead for a role like that.
It did, and I do remember actually getting that service delivery manager job, general manager, which was it was very meaningful for me because having been the personal assistant who at Ian Arthurton's team meeting used to literally bring coffee to the general managers. I'm very proud of the fact one day I was one of those general managers.
One of them, yeah.
Yeah, I just, and so that's something, I'm not meaning to be falsely humble. I really worked hard to get that, and I am quite a determined person. And I remember thinking once, when occasionally Mr. Arthurton would say, can everyone except the general managers please leave the room? And that, on occasions, that would include me as the PA, although I was in a very trusted position.
Yeah.
But on the occasions where I had to leave the room, I remember thinking, one day I don't want to leave the room. And, so you drive yourself to get to that. And my preceding position had been train service manager for the Met Circle and H&C. And we were known as the cultural attaches for various reasons I won't go into. But I remember my job was basically eliminated in a reorganization, and these service delivery managers were created. There was one for stations, one for trains. My oppo was Bob Bayman, another fantastic person, real great operator. So we ran BCV between us, Bakerloo Central and Vic, which actually brought me full circle. One of many times in my career I've come full circle. I started as a foreman at Regent's Park on the Bakerloo line, and I end up going back as general manager, amongst others, of the Bakerloo line. So my first day, I made a point of going to Regent's Park, going back as the GM. And I remember during my time as service delivery manager, one thing that does stand out was, getting back to where we started, football, I just happened to be on the terraces at Meadow Lane, Notts County. I was on my day off. It was a Saturday. Argyle were 2-0 up against Notts County. We were cruising, and my pager went off. As an operator, you never take your pager off. You never take your phone off. I hadn't had a drink, which is just as well, because it said there was a mainline derailment at Chancery Lane. I couldn't believe it. Initially, I thought that can't be right. It's got to be in Hainault or West Ruislip or somewhere. But no, it was on the main line. I quickly checked in with the NCC, and they said, yeah, we're in real trouble. We got one off the rails at Chancery. I didn't have to. I mobilized. I went straight to the turnstile, said to the steward, you've got to let me out, mate. I've got to go back to London. He goes, you nuts? You're 2-0 up. Ran to the station. I was on site at Chancery within an hour and a half doing media. Because that's what you do, right? If you're a railwayman, the railway comes first. So that I remember in my time at BCV, and the MD of the time, Paul Godier, was very kind to give me, with other people, an award for that.
That's fantastic. I mean, you mentioned there, Paul Godier, managing director. I mean, that would have been the obvious next step for you, and perhaps even, passenger services director as well. But that didn't happen, because instead, and I suppose we're talking early 2000 now, instead you left the Underground, which is a big thing, and went to work for, the big railway, the privatised train operating companies. Where did you go, and why did you do that?
Sure. Look, I mean, sometimes people ask me for advice. It's odd, at our stage in our careers, Rich, when people describe you as a veteran. You're like, what?
I hate that. Don't say that.
Yeah, you're talking to me. And then you realize you kind of are after all this time. So one piece of advice I often give people is don't say, when are they going to do something about my career development? Well, who are they? When are you going to do something about it? Yes, you have to have, sometimes you have to have, there's a bit of luck. It's ultimately it's God's plan where you go, but you also have to make your own luck. You've got to decide, what do you want to do in the future? What will take you out of your comfort zone? How will you develop as an individual, and then go for it? So I could have stayed at the Tube. I loved the Tube. It was great. Yes, I probably would have progressed on further, but I always wanted to work internationally, and I also felt I should get mainline operational experience. But it was actually a friend of mine who drew the advert for what was then the ops director for Connex Southeastern to my attention. So that fit both bills. It was working on the main line, so tick. The other was, it was a French company, Connex, and so I thought, do a couple of years at Southeast London, run the train service, learn about the main line, and then go hopefully to Paris and put my French to good use. But it all went horribly wrong because while I was under notice from LUL, Connex was stripped of their franchise, and maybe you had something to do with that, my friend. And I remember the then MD of the Tube, which was Tim O'Toole, newly appointed. He said to me, will your bad fortune become our good fortune? He wanted me to stay. But I'd made the mental leap, and I also tried to be loyal, and I tried to be ethical in what I do. I'd promised Michael Holden, the MD of Connex, that I would come, and I was not about to renege on that. So I did go, and I spent 3 very happy years at Connex Southeastern, which of course was brought back into public ownership, and we, under Michael's leadership, completely turned things around.
Do you know, it's fascinating you say that, Andy. I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. Might have been at the SRA when we stripped that franchise from Connex. But actually, what then happened was remarkable, and it was an exercise in great people. It wasn't public or private. It was great people. Michael, you mentioned you, obviously. And you kind of gave it a bit of a problem, really, because you sort of turned it round into such an extent that there were plenty of people going, why does this need to be relet? You know, which is, funnily enough, is an argument or discussion that's taking place all these years later.
Michael put together a superb team.
Yes.
Janet Somerville, a commercial. Alex Warner ran the stations, very good friend of mine. A complete transformation of what were shoddy, scruffy stations with downtrodden stuff. Complete transformation. Phil Verster, with whom I've crossed paths many a time now in Toronto. Phil transformed the train side of things in terms of he ran the fleet and I ran operations. So my job was to drive up punctuality and cleanliness. Phil transformed, among other things, we had the class 465, 466 networkers, known by customers as not workers.
Yes.
And they were rebuilt. We designed out the single points of failure, and it did give the government a bit of a problem, because the unions pointed at Southeastern and said, this is why the whole lot should be brought back in-house.
But you know, you didn't go on to another big train operator company. I mean, I remember thinking at the time, you know, this is one of those guys that's going to go on and run something really big in UK rail. You didn't. Instead, you went as far away from UK rail as it's possible to go, and you went to Australia. I mean, was that a big culture shock? I mean, that must have been a big change from what we had over here in the UK.
So, I mean, after Southeastern, I moved sideways to Southern at the new owning group's request, Go Ahead Group, and great 3 years there. But it was actually just by chance, a headhunter called. I remember the secretary saying, look, there's someone wants to talk to you, and can I put them through? They won't tell me what it's about. And go back to, remember when I said the reason I left the Tube to go to Connex Southeastern was this hankering to work abroad. That itch had not gone away, and suddenly I was, sitting in my office in Croydon, looking out the window, and the headhunter said, "Would you consider a job in Australia, working for working for Rail Corp, Rail Corp's New South Wales, as operations director." And so I have to say, no disrespect to our listeners, your listeners who live in Croydon. I looked out the window at Croydon. I thought about Sydney Opera House, Sydney Harbour Bridge. Yes, I would be interested in that. So again, second piece of career advice to any young rail people thinking about career moves. Think about an international gig, because once you're on the radar of headhunters as someone who would take that plunge, it's not easy. Then other opportunities ensue. So I talked to my wife about it. We knew it's not something we did lightly, because it is a long way away, and you're leaving family, you're leaving your comfort zone, you're leaving behind. But I wanted to give it a go. I was intrigued by Australia. Again, it was career development, because this was running all of the train service for New South Wales, plus my mandate was to drive up customer service. And another attraction, it's always good to know who your boss is, was Rob Mason, a former GM of the Victoria Line, another Pommy, was running Rail Corp. So I went out and worked for Rob. He said to me, job is drive up punctuality, but 2 specific jobs you've got to do. 1, deliver what's called the station staff review, and 2, drive up customer service. So that's what I said about. The station staff review was highly contentious. It was putting station staff where customers most needed them and when they most needed them, because you had small stations with hardly anyone, big stations with hardly anyone, and small stations with far too many people at the wrong times. Not an easy gig, because I'm the newbie. I'm up against very tough union leaders, one in particular, and we had quite the ding dong, but in the end we we prevailed. We got the station staff review through. We didn't have any industrial action. We delivered the savings. And actually, that same union leader is now a personal friend of mine, Phil Kessie. The other role was to drive up customer service. And so Rob asked me to focus on that. We introduced a customer charter, and I was very pleased just before I left that we won the Australian Customer Service Institute Customer Charter of the Year award, which was down to my team.
And
really pleased with
that really is an amazing achievement, because I know Australia, well, not from a work point of view, but mainly from a family point of view. My wife grew up there, so been many, many times. People think, oh, it's terribly laid back. It's all very, very relaxed, and it's Barbies on the beach. Yeah. Actually, the union industrial relations there are strong, and it's very challenging, isn't it? So to have achieved that is it really is a sort of feather in the cap. You then, though, you left Australia, and keeping with the international theme, you went and got your first big job where you were the boss, and went to Toronto to the transit corporation there. I mean, that was a big move. Yes, you were going to be the boss, but why Toronto?
My wife is Canadian. We met at the Tube, funnily enough. I like to say on the Tube. It wasn't quite as romantic as that. We met at the Tube, and Ali's from Ottawa. And in fact, we got engaged on a high-speed train, which sounds really sad. It just so happens we did. But this move was kind of for her. I'm not exclusively. I also saw this as an opportunity. And I loved Australia. We thought long and hard about it. We agonized over it. I'd love to have stayed there in many ways, but it was a long way psychologically to be away from family. It's much easier to get back to the UK from Canada, and also Ali's parents were a lot older than mine, and so going back to Canada was something that really attracted us. Plus, the Toronto Transit Commission is, to me, one of the absolute leading transit authorities in the world, the TTC. You can see behind me a vintage poster from the 50s from the TTC. And this, again, was career development, right? I talked about how you got to progressively build your career. So far, stations on a mass transit system, the Tube, yep, okay, tick. And a bit of trains as well. Mainline operations, yep, tick. Customer service added in, tick, in Australia. I'd never run buses or streetcars, trams, we'd call them. And the TTC is a multimodal system. So for myriad reasons, I somewhat reluctantly said goodbye to Australia. We did. And we went to Toronto. And I wasn't initially the CEO. Initially, I worked for another figure from, legendary figure at the TTC, Gary Webster. But I do remember when I turned up at the TTC for my interview, I had a slightly foreboding sense, because there was a billboard, one of those newspaper billboards that said Ford's plotting to oust Webster. The Fords being the brothers. One became the mayor, one was it's now the premier of Ontario, and they were looking to make a change. So initially, though, I was the ops director, and I set about absolutely improving basics, which was something I then really majored on when I took over the job of CEO, when unfortunately Gary was let go.
I mean, it was in quite a state. We'll probably come and talk about Rob Ford in a moment, but it was in quite a state, the TTC, when you got there, wasn't it? I mean, that it must have been both that incredibly daunting challenge, but quite an exciting one as well.
Very much so. And if anyone ever asked me to characterize my career, it's kind of colored by going into challenging situations. That's what I do. I'm not very good at steady state. I don't really like steady state. I find it a bit boring. What I like to do is go into somewhere where there's a real either mess or a real challenge, quite often not of the organization's making, and identify rapidly what needs to be done, and then take decisive action to sort it out. And I love building capable management teams. So at the TTC, again, this fabulous system of the subway started in 1954. The TTC's just had its 100th anniversary, actually, but very capable system, but had somewhat lost its way in terms of customer service. So what did we face? And this actually started when I first got there. I remember going around the system, taking photos and putting them up in my office, because it motivated me to do something about it. There were handwritten notices everywhere, all over the collectors' booths, handwritten notices which were invariably, grammatically incorrect or wrongly spelt. It just made us look like a mom and pop organization. The trackside walls on the subway were filthy. The stations didn't look like they'd been cleaned for months. There was garbage everywhere. Where there was engineering work going on in the stations, there were these sort of Heath Robinson structures to protect the work sites. Tarpaulins held down with chairs and things. It was woeful. It was squalid. And I'm a stickler for basics. You've got to get the basics right, because if you're a customer standing on a platform and you see a filthy trackside wall, do you really have confidence that the organization is properly managing safety? They can't even get that right. So once I took over as the CEO, it used to be the general manager, a chief general manager. I asked for the job to be modernized, CEO. We had an all-out blitz on operational basics, but backed by an all-out push on improving morale. Because here's something I feel super strong about. You cannot run a transit system from behind a desk. You've got to get out and about, and you've got to go and visit the stations, the train crew depots, the fleet depots. You've got to see for yourself what works and what doesn't work. But also, you must back your colleagues, your frontline colleagues, to the hilt. They have a difficult job. I know that. I did that. So I'm out there. Yes, I expect them to up their game, but I'm shoulder to shoulder with them, and I'm sticking up for them. It's a bit like the Alex Ferguson method of management. You praise in public and you bollock in private. Absolutely, I was out there taking accountability. The job became very high profile because I was out there. If we screwed something up, I'll take it. I'll own it. If it wasn't the TTC's fault, we're not wearing that. So I was on TV a fair bit, but absolutely focusing on driving up basics, which ultimately culminated us in getting a Transit of the Year award, which maybe we'll come on to. But I loved the TTC. I was there for 6 years. It was my first command, and I will always love the people there and my former colleagues, and I'll always love it as an institution. It's amazing.
Do you think the fact that in the end you left Toronto, and we'll come on to where in a moment because it's dramatic, but do you think the reason why you left Toronto in the end was a bit like you were saying before? You do get perhaps a little bit bored with a steady state, kind of got it to a great position, won the award, Transit Operator of the Year. And it's just like, oh, okay, what is there now to do? Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of that wanderlust in a way. But in addition to focusing on basics and to building a killer team, do you know the TTC had never had a woman on its executive in its whole year, nearly 100 years,
Wow.
until we came together as a team. So progressively and through positive action, but not no quotas, but through prioritizing people from underrepresented groups. If candidates could not otherwise be split on merit, we gave it to the underrepresented group. By the time I left, we were 50-50 gender representation, which I was very proud of. But it was also a time where we had 5 mega projects on the go. There wasn't a strategic plan. So with my chief customer officer, Chris Upfold, we put together a strategic plan and with a vision statement, a transit system that makes Toronto proud. And concurrently, we introduced a new streetcar fleet and built a new streetcar barn depot. We were rolling out new Toronto rocket trains and automatic train control, so a new signaling system. We were introducing Presto, which is the smart card system for this province of Ontario. And at the same time, and in addition to a massive push on customer service, we had the small matter of getting a late running subway extension, which is something I'll come back to when we talk about TfL. The late running Toronto York Spadina subway extension had to be taken in hand and driven to the finish line. So 5 concurrent mega projects. That's what won us the APTA, American Public Transportation Association, Outstanding Transit System of the Year award, which I was immensely proud of us winning. When you think we came from a position in 2012 where the Globe and Mail described the TTC as, I think I'm right in saying, a demoralized shambles. we got to a position of winning the APTA Outstanding Transit of the Year award in 2017. And the reason I felt so strongly about us going for it, and ultimately we won it, it meant the world to the frontline staff. We sent one
Yeah.
of our comms people round to the bus and train depots and just said to the staff, "What did you think when you heard the TTC had won the APTA Transit of the Year award?" And they were so chuffed. They were pumped by it. So I dedicated it to them. It was their
Brilliant.
efforts. It was the TTC staff efforts. A few people scoffed. They said, "Oh, you can't believe it. How come TTC's Transit of the Year?" I remember one group gave us the least funded transit system of the year award as attempting to mock us, completely missing the point that we'd done that all in spite of being the least funded transit
Yeah.
system in North America. So I left on a high. I loved the TTC and always will.
Before we leave Toronto, though, on the journey, I have to ask you about Rob Ford. Mayor of Toronto. Whilst you were there, you arrived on the day when the billboard said he was trying to get your then boss out, which obviously happened. So you must have had a very close relationship. I mean, I suppose the non-informed view of Rob Ford is this very colourful character. Slightly odd, really, in a way. But what was he actually like? I mean, it must have been a remarkable time to have been there when he was there.
Well, it's funny, Rich. If I ever wrote a book about my career, it could be based around, anchored around personalities with whom I've worked, like in Australia, some really colourful characters as transport secretaries, and then Rob at the TTC, the governor at New York, and then of course Mayor Sadiq Khan at TfL. So back to Rob. I love Rob Ford. May he rest in peace. He was a wonderful person. He really was. Um, possibly, possibly not best suited for mayor. He was an outstanding local councillor. He was passionate about sticking up for his constituents, about getting the basics right. You wanted your pothole filled. He's your man. Street lights out. He's already reported it. Rob Ford, to me, was a wonderful, kind, decent human being. And although he had his much publicized demons in terms of the crack addiction and drink, etc., etc., I can honestly say not once in my interactions with Rob was he under the influence. Not once. Even though he would often phone me in the middle of the night and my phone would ring at literally 3 a.m. because he's still out and about. And the phone would ring, and I always remember it was so funny. He used to phone me, and he'd go, I'd say hello, and he'd say, "Hi, Andy, it's Rob Ford, Mayor of Toronto." And I was always tempted to say, "Oh, that Rob
That
Ford."
Rob Ford.
And so I'd say, "Yes, Mr. Mayor, how can I help you?" "Well, I'm standing on the corner of I don't know, Dundas and Yonge Street, and I've got a resident here, a customer. He'd always call them customers, who's wondering where their bus is. Can I put them on to you?" "Yes, Mr. Mayor, no problem." And I'm thinking, how do I know? It's 3 a.m. How on earth do I know where this bus
Brilliant.
is? So I would kind of fob the person off and say, "It should be with you within 10 minutes, ma'am," or whatever. And then Rob would come back on and thank me. I loved Rob. I went to his funeral. I'm honoured and proud to have met the man, and I know his brother, Doug, who's the Premier of Ontario. Everyone will have their opinions on Rob Ford. Mine is wholly positive. May he rest in peace.
Well, that is a really uplifting story. I mean, thank you for sharing that because it's quite personal as well. But what a time it would have been to be there. But they say, you're always up for a challenge. You're kind of like going where it's tough. It does not get much more tough than New York, right? And so your next role after Toronto is to go to be CEO of New York, the Mass Transit Authority. Wow. I mean, how on earth did that come about? And, that must have been, well, I can't even begin to imagine. I mean, what was it like?
It was magical. There's a huge part of me, Rich, that and I can tell you when we come on to TfL, it was the same feeling as I waited to meet Her Majesty the Queen. There's a bit of me that it's almost like your life flashes before you. You go back almost to your childhood. I'm some kid from Plymouth. How the hell did I become president of New York City Transit? But basically, I think I did come to the attention of New York because of running the TTC. The TTC is the largest transit system in Canada, and it's the third largest transit system in North America after Mexico and New York City. So uh, that was to me the holy grail. I could have, I guess, run LT, London Transport, and funny enough, I ended up doing that. But to me, the ultimate was New York City. My wife and I went there on honeymoon in New York. We went on to Costa Rica after that. But New York was this magical city, the city that never sleeps, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State. It's a magical place. And I, I pinched myself when I did get the job to be on the subway and you're on a Lexington line train and you hear, this is an uptown train going to the Bronx. And you're like, I can't believe I'm the president of New York City Transit, Mr. President, they used to call me. So how did I get it? I was approached by New York. I mean, obviously, there was a vacancy, and I'm sure they talked to many other people, but I was invited down to New York. So I flew from Pearson down to LaGuardia, and I went through this quite extensive interview process where initially I met with multiple people at MTA HQ. And was interviewed, but also they were sounding me out. They were asking me about my experience, etc. Then I was asked to go to what we call the chambers in New York, which is the governor's offices, and I met his lawyer, his secretary, which is the secretary to the governor, is a very senior position. It's like his chief of staff, and various other people, and that seemed to go pretty well. And I'd gone down for the day, and they said, "Well, thank you very much, Mr. Byford. Thanks for coming in. We will let you know in due course." So I went back to see sort of my minder at the governor's office, and she said, "Well, I think we're done for the day." And I went down in the elevator down to the lobby, and I'd actually was just texting my wife to say, "I think I'm going to be back early. I'm going to head to LaGuardia, see if I can get on an earlier flight." When someone came running down and said, "Oh, thank goodness you're still here. The governor wants to see you."
Okay,
So,
wow.
okay, back upstairs. And I met with Governor Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, the then governor, who it wasn't so much an interview, it was more of a pep talk. He talked to me about how tough New York is as a state, and as a city, and in particular the culture. It's very, very straight talking. It's very demanding, and he himself, to his credit, said he's very demanding. But he asked me one point blank question, "Mr. Byford, can you can you guarantee me that you can improve the subway within 1 year?" So I said to him, "Yes, Governor. I know what to do. I need to focus all out on basics," because I came into the job after what was described as the summer of hell. So once again, going back into a really difficult situation. And this was a situation where, and in the previous 6 months, they'd had derailments, there were floodings, the whole subway was basically falling apart, and punctuality had plunged to an embarrassing 59%. So anyway, the governor said, "Well, it's nice to meet you, and I'll leave you now to go back to Toronto." And I went back again to see my minder, and she said, "Wow, I've just had a text from the secretary saying 2 words, uppercase, hire him." And I went to LaGuardia, I had a beer, and I phoned my wife and I said, "Hey, I think we're moving to New York." And I
Wow.
was so excited. I couldn't believe it.
That's such a cool story. I mean,
Hmm.
when you went to New York, I'd sort of look at your time at New York in sort of like two phases, really. And you'll probably say, no, it's a lot more nuanced than that. But it started, what feels like really positively.
Yeah,
It ended in more challenging circumstances. And we'll
sure.
come on to that. But there must have been a point where it did shift. I mean, talk about the beginning, and maybe if you
Mhm.
can, and you're happy to talk about, where it pivoted and why.
Sure. So the first year was fantastic. I remember even the first day because the comms director said to me, "Andy, this is a massive big deal that they are saying, wow, we've got some Brit coming to run the New York subway." The
Were you the
first,
were you the first ever
yes, yeah.
non US citizen to run it?
Correct.
Wow.
Correct. There's a guy called David Gunn who, funnily enough, had also run the TTC, who has dual nationality, Canadian and American. I think he
Okay.
was born in America.
Ah.
The first and only ever Brit to run to run New York City. In fact, one of the things I'm most proud of, Richard, in my career is it's unique. I'm the only person ever to have run the largest transit systems in Canada, the US, and the UK, plus on a day-to-day basis, Australia. So I'm very proud of that. But this comms director said to me, you are going to be met by a massive New York press mob. So we got to control this. And what I've arranged for is for them to meet us when you get off the train at Bowling Green, which is the station in Lower Manhattan outside the MTA's headquarters. I think at the time they all thought it was a photo stunt, me arriving on the train, but it wasn't actually. I took the train or the bus to work every day. So anyway, I got on at Grand Central and I rode down the Lex to be met by this phalanx of reporters at Bowling Green. But the night before, because you've got to be a professional, the night before I'd gone down there in mufti, no one knew who I was. I went down there and I walked the route from the platform to the exit that I needed to go out of, because you don't want to be that idiot who doesn't know where they're going, even though you'd probably get given some license for that because it's your first day, right? I wanted to see for myself the route that I'd need to take. I'd also thought, Richard, beforehand, I'd thought extensively about keeping it simple. What is the essence of what needs to be done? And I thought about this. So anyway, I got off the train, cameras flashing. It was insane, the media interest. And we walked through the station, people unfortunately kind of getting pushed out of the way, and to then hold a formal press conference outside 2 Broadway before I went into the building and got given my pass, etc., etc. And I stood up, and there's photos on the internet of this. I stood up and I said, obviously, I'm very honoured to have been selected. I'm very honoured to be asked to be the new president of New York City Transit. It seems to me there are 4 things that we need to do. Number one, the most transformative thing that can and must be done is for the subway. We must re-signal the subway. There's 1940s fixed block signalling. We've got to move to CBTC, and we've got to expedite that rollout. Number two, there's been a precipitous decline in bus ridership, and a lot of it is because the buses follow these circuitous routes, and because they're really not going where people need them to go, and there's too many stops, etc., etc. We need to reimagine the bus network. Number three, we cannot be proud of a transit system until and unless all New Yorkers have access to it. So we must massively expedite making this subway fully accessible. And number four, back to my earlier point, you can only do that with, not in spite of, with the frontline staff. You've got to bring them with you. You've got to have a vision that everyone believes in, into which they've had input, and that they feel part of. They've got skin in the game. So the fourth stream of what became my fast forward plan was that a success can only be delivered through excellent customer service, through cherished, respected colleagues. So that press conference seemed to go down pretty well. Within 100 days, we put together a strategic plan, which we call Fast Forward, and that was anchored around those 4 elements. And we then powered through this and had also a program called Save Safe Seconds, delivered by my senior vice president for subways, first ever woman appointed to that role on my watch, Sally Labrera. And Sally oversaw. Remember, I said it was 59% on time running?
Yeah.
By the time I left, it was 82% and climbing. So if nothing else, when Governor Cuomo asked me in that first time I'd ever met him, can you improve the subway within a year? We did, and more.
So that you did exactly what he asked. So where did it change? What happened during that process then of your time in New York?
If I could do it all again, I fast forward a bit to when I'm then sitting on my own in Plymouth, when I went back to the UK just before I became TfL commissioner, and I was kind of embittered by what happened, because unfortunately the second year it kind of fell apart a little bit. I did make mistakes, though. I mean, one of the mistakes, I have to say, was not really of my own making. I didn't ask to do this. I was asked by the comms team, because we were really trying to promote what we were doing to improve service. I was asked to do 2 things. One, would I accept being profiled by the New Yorker magazine? And so, okay, I'll do that. I didn't know how big a deal that was. And I was followed around by a fabulous journalist for maybe a month. And then this quite extensive profile was written of me. But secondly, I was asked to go on.
Sorry, Andy, just for
Sure.
British, for people listening in the UK, that is a massive, massive deal. I mean, I'm not even sure what the comparison is really, but that's huge, right? So yeah.
Well, the other big deal, and I didn't realize this at all, was I was asked to go on 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes, it turns out, the great and the good are interviewed
Yeah.
and profiled on 60 Minutes, and it shows at prime time in the US. There's probably an audience of, I don't know, 200 million, because often it's shown, say, for example, after the football, the American
Yeah.
football. So again, I was followed around by a journalist, and I then did a sit-down interview in the fabulous New York Transit Museum. And this show duly ran, and it was 20 minutes long, the segment. But it turns out the governor had always wanted to be on 60 Minutes, and I think couldn't believe and was very annoyed by this upstart, this newbie, this person not even from here, who's suddenly garnering all this attention because suddenly. And I don't seek publicity, but the job kind of draws you into it unless you just sit in the office. And I said earlier, you can't run a transit system sat behind a desk. So I was out and about. I wore a name badge. They didn't have name badges. I introduced name badges. I wore my name badge riding on the Lexington every morning. Customers would ask me about the subway and what have you. I went out and about all around the 5 boroughs. I did town hall meetings. We did nearly 100 town halls to promote the Fast Forward plan and to get the money we needed for it, which we did. The legislature approved 40 billion for Fast Forward, which is now the capital program that's still being executed. So I'm proud of that. That's the legacy. Fast Forward may not exist as a name, but it's been subsumed into the wider MTA capital plan. So they're still doing all the various things that we identified needed to be done. Anyway, the governor clearly didn't like that. So maybe it was a bit of a mistake doing those two things. Plus, there was also when Superstorm Sandy hit, it caused a load of damage to all of the tunnels going under the East River, and progressively, New York City Transit had rehabilitated those tunnels by ripping out all of the damaged stuff and putting in and rebuilding as was. And the last to be done and the most tricky to be done was under the East River on the L line, which has a daily ridership of something like 750,000. It's immense. But that was a project I inherited. It was going to be a nightmare. But because I inherited it, my mandate, my marching orders were not to question it, but to make it a success, to run a massive busing operation across the Williamsburg Bridge in order to make a success. So I set out to do that. With no notice, at the very last second, the governor changed the plan and said he'd had some academics down who felt that the damaged bench walls could be encased in basically glass reinforced fiber, and the cables therein could be replaced and slung from the tunnel roof. Time will tell whether that is actually a long-term fix. We shall see. But the governor actually said to me, this is not your issue. You didn't come up with that original plan. Stay out of it.
Wow.
So, okay, I get it. He's the boss. Stay out of it. But the trouble was, when that change in plan happened, the rest of the politicians in New York and the general public went absolutely crazy. And for starters, they were saying, is this new system safe? Mr. Byford, you're the president of New York City Transit. You have been out there touting this plan. Now there's a new plan. Is it safe? Well, I'm a former safety director, and as a safety director, you have two key principles. You must exercise due diligence, which is to make sure you've unturned every stone, you've looked at everything to make sure that you're doing the best thing possible and that you're taking every possible precaution. And you must act upon guilty knowledge. If you have guilty knowledge, you know that something's happened or that something might not be safe, you can't ignore it. So I called for, I said, look, fine, great, fabulous, new plan, don't have to mess New Yorkers about, we'll do the tunnels one at a time. Let's have an independent safety review to check that this is safe. So I'm not arguing with the governor's plan. I'm not saying it's wrong. We've just got to check that something this radical is safe. He did not like that. I think from that day on, my card was marked. And I found myself progressively sidelined, excluded from meetings, and my job was cut in half. All of the capital element, Fast Forward, was taken away overnight. I was left with running the day-to-day, not bad in itself, but even there, behind my back, my own direct reports would be given marching orders from the governor's office on safety critical issues, and that to me was intolerable. So very reluctantly, I felt this had become something that was kind of intolerable. I just felt just wasn't going to work. So after two, I have to say, overall fabulous years, I resigned, and my send off was the most humbling thing I've ever experienced.
I mean, just talk a bit about that, because you'd earned this moniker, Train Daddy, which follows you around to this day. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but that's, whenever I talk to people from the US, it's, oh yeah, Train Daddy. And I mean, tell us a bit about that send off. I mean, it would have brought a tear to the eye of even the hardest heart, really.
Yeah, it's on. I mean, if anyone's interested, it's on Andy Byford sent off from the MTA. I mean, it was humbling. I mean, the Train Daddy piece is still a mystery to me. Someone somewhere came up with these stickers and the idea of calling me Train Daddy, and it said "Train Daddy loves you very much." It was my head superimposed on the front of a train. It was meant to be, leave him alone, back off, he's doing a good job, leave him alone. And people would stop me in the street and they'd go, yo, Train Daddy, how you doing? And all this stuff. And I'd have people coming up to me in the street, which was very nice, but I don't seek that. I just wanted to do my job right. I'm a railwayman. I just wanted to do my job for New Yorkers. But somehow that resonated with them. And I did tenaciously stick up for New York City Transit in the face of pretty awful political attacks. And, there was some quite scandalous things went on. Various people were just let go for no good reason. And I resisted that to the hilt. I remember the governor once at an event openly mocked my cleaners. Who does that? So I actually put out a memo to say, I'm very proud of you, to the cleaners. You don't obviously say, unlike insert name here. I just made sure they knew I absolutely appreciated the fact that what the janitors did, the cleaners did, I appreciated if no one else did. Anyway, on my last day, I was kind of dreading it because I thought, oh, it's going to be a big fuss. I don't really like a big fuss. It was unbelievable. I went down in the elevator down to the lobby, and there must have been 1,000 of my colleagues there in the lobby. It was jam packed. I said a few words. I went out onto the pavement. There was again, same as I started 2 years on, a battery of media. There were news choppers up. I walked through the station. There was a guard honor. What do you call it? A guard of honor by NYPD. I loved working with NYPD. There was a big fuss made on the train. I ended up having to get off the train at 14th Street Union Square with my, believe it or not, I had a security detail. He said, look, let's get off at 14th Street or the media are going to follow you home. We'll go into the transit division police station and we'll sit there until they give up, which is what we did. And then we went for a drink.
Wow.
It was the most humbling send off. It was hard to maintain my composure, actually. But then, because it was such a sudden end and because it had been such an emotional high, I felt somewhat bereft after that. Suddenly it just ended, and this was my dream job. So I don't regret it. I'm very proud of what we achieved, and the legacy lives on in the Fast Forward plan.
I did notice on that, though, that, I mean, almost like a bit of breaking news, that very recently the congestion charge that was going to be introduced for sort of lower Manhattan, I mean, I think $15 a day, which was going to be a very important revenue stream for transit in New York. I think the state governor has paused it indefinitely. I mean, that's quite that's a bit of a blow to that capital. But I realize that's not, you're longer gone now from New York, but you must have seen that and thought, ouch, that's not going to help.
It was like history repeating itself, Richard. For the now chair of the MTA, Jano Lieber, who was my peer at Transit, he was president of the construction division. I was president of New York City Transit. Jano got a well-earned promotion to MTA chairman, and I think it was a very similar experience for him, probably, that literally with a few hours' notice, what he had been faithfully pushing for, because those were his marching orders, suddenly the rug was pulled out from under his feet, and he was suddenly faced with having to be the public face of trying to explain, well, what do we do now? That the whole backbone, if you will, of of the MTA's funding, and for Fast Forward for that matter, had been removed at a stroke. So I've seen Jano since. I happened to be at 2 Broadway, the HQ of the MTA, just a couple of weeks ago. The day that happened, I was at a luncheon for former transit presidents. And poor old Jano, he looked a bit shell-shocked, but he's a trooper, and they are already rallying to
Yeah.
figure out a way to keep the improvements going.
Brilliant. So we've left New York, and then the next thing we hear is that you are the new TfL, Transport for London Commissioner. I mean, the world is, your life and your career has arguably gone sort of full circle. I mean, I suppose it's a slightly crass question, really. Did you call them or did they call you? I mean, it must have been quite serendipitous suddenly to find yourself back where you started.
Well, it was. I mean, there is an air of, or an element of serendipity about it, not least because actually 3 days before my final interview, my mum passed suddenly of a brain aneurysm while I was in the UK. I'd gone back to the UK. So as it happened, my poor dad was then, he was bereft. I was then with him at the time he most needed me, and in a job that he was very proud of, because he's LT as well. He did 12 years there. It's a family thing. And so I just happened to be there through then the next 2.5 very difficult years for him, to support him. So, sometimes, again, God's plan, that it's just serendipitous that you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. I'd left New York. My wife was still there. I was sitting alone in our apartment in Plymouth, looking back upon my time in New York, feeling slightly embittered. And I try not to be a bitter person. You try to be a good Christian person, but I was slightly embittered and in a bit of shell shock, if I'm honest. But also, I felt desperately guilty because when I left New York in February, we'd heard about this weird thing called COVID, that there was something weird going on in Wuhan. And I think the first case had hit in New York State, in upstate New York, but, we didn't really know what it was. And suddenly the full horror of COVID was hitting not only the US, but also the UK. So I'm sitting there, I'm watching on TV the clap for heroes, the way that people rallied in the UK and the way the NHS stepped up to the plate. And I just thought, clearly I'm going to be here for a while. And I am aware that there is the job of TfL Commissioner. Mike Brown, very good personal friend of mine, done a stellar job, stayed on, was leaving. And so I phoned the headhunters and I said, I'd like to throw my hat into the ring. And I did so just in time. And the main reason, Rich, was, I got the family history, but I really wanted to do my bit for Britain because suddenly everyone was stepping up to the plate. I knew I once again would be walking into a real difficult situation, but I wanted to give it a go. So I thought, I think I could help TfL, I could do my bit, and I could join TfL in its darkest hour. And so that's what I did in very difficult circumstances. And I was honored actually when the mayor phoned me to say, I'd like you to be my fourth commissioner. And, obviously that meant a lot to me personally, because there I was, started as a foreman, ended up, wow, I can't believe it, I'm going to be the commissioner of transport for London.
On the same board as Lord Ashfield and Sir Wilfrid
Lord Ashfield,
Newton and
Sir
Pete
Neil
Hendy.
Shields,
Yeah,
Sir
yeah.
Wilfrid Newton, Lord Sir Peter Hendy. Again, how am I on that list? But it was an honor to be commissioner. And I also, once again, just as I did in New York, I figured out what really needed to be done. And the way I framed my job, if you really dumbed it down, there were two outstanding, clear priorities. Number one, lead TfL through the COVID crisis and rebuild its finances, morale, and ridership. Number two, get Crossrail finished and get the Elizabeth line open.
Yeah.
There were a number of other priorities which we can unpack, but those were the two clear objectives I set for my tenure, not knowing how long it would be.
Talk a bit about Crossrail and Elizabeth line. I mean, the project that sort of has its roots, I guess, in the Central London Rail study that probably even almost predated you and me going to the Underground, and certainly around that time. But it did get done in the end. But was it a challenge? I mean, what did it take to get from nearly open to open?
Absolutely. Well, let me, if you don't mind, let me just say, first of all, just set the scene. Walking into TFL, then, like I said, notwithstanding Mike's great work, it was on its it was its nadir. It was TFL had there was no money, no riders. You know, the finances were in a calamitous state. The ridership had plummeted. Morale was really low. The Elizabeth Line Crossrail was nowhere near completion. There was some issues to be sorted out within the executive committee, and there was no corporate plan to talk of, or no strategic mission statement at TFL level. There was at the subdivisions, so there was a lot to do. So with the Elizabeth Line Crossrail, remember I said that one of the challenges I faced at the TTC was the late running TYSSE, the Toronto York Spadina subway extension. You have to step in. You can't just sit back and watch something become, a slow car crash. That project in Toronto, it was obvious to me. It was already late running. It was already over budget. I had to do something as the CEO. So you have to take decisive action. And it seemed to me with the then management team, it wasn't going to happen for myriad reasons. You tried to make it happen. It wasn't going to happen. And I remember back in my TFL days, my LUL days, London Transport at the time brought in Bechtel, the American organization Bechtel, to get the Jubilee Line extension finished. I was very impressed with what they did. They're kind of blunt and how they go about things, but they get it done. So I brought Bechtel in, and we finished the Spadina subway extension in Toronto with no further slippage, and I'm very proud of that. Fast forward to then what I inherited at Transport for London. The Elizabeth Line was supposed to have opened at the end of 2018, and up to mid 2018, the then Crossrail team were kind of on a roadshow going around saying, come and see how Britain can build major projects on time and on budget. And I was in New York at the time, and I actually couldn't attend when they came to New York on this roadshow. I sent my chief capital officer and said, can you go along and learn the secret sauce? So I was amazed when in mid 2018 they said, actually, no, it's not going to open end of 2018. It needs another year. How deluded were they? It didn't need another year. It needed another, 2.5 years, because we didn't, 4 years, because we didn't open until 2022. And yet they were saying, 2019. So 2019 came and went, 2020. So I turn up as the commissioner. I felt that my predecessor, Mike, was left somewhat exposed by relying on a third party, namely the then Crossrail board. This was a different Crossrail board from the one
Yeah,
that had declared that slippage
yeah,
in
yeah.
2018. And I think they've done a good job. But I felt that it needed to be brought in-house. So I made the case to Sadiq Khan. Even though I could have had an easy life, I could have just said, I'll turn up on opening day whenever that is. Nothing to do with me, Gov. It's the Crossrail board's responsibility. No, you've got to step up. You've got to own it. So I said to Sadiq, I need Crossrail to be brought in-house. I want that to happen. I will take personal responsibility for this, which is not something I did lightly. I had a good reputation. It could have gone horribly wrong. But you do your homework, first of all. And I'd had a kind of a behind-the-scenes team from, guess where, Bechtel, have a look at what would it take to get this thing done by either the end of 21 or the beginning of 22. Because I wanted to live up to a promise I made to Sadiq. There will be, if you give it to me, there will be no further recourse to public funding over and above that which we inherited, the budget, and no further slippage to schedule over and above that which we inherited, which was a rather vague first half of 2022. So in I go. The CEO reported to me, Mark Wild. It's true to say the CEO felt that this was going to be the end of his career, that he couldn't see how we were going to get this thing done. And there was also, I think, a real blindness in terms of the level of completion of the stations. There was also a view in the project we should get rid of Bechtel, that they weren't adding value. I took the opposite view. I asked Bechtel to take the lead role under Mark's stewardship, and also we brought in a specialist. I persuaded him to come out of retirement. The guy who delivered the stations for me in Toronto, a real good friend of mine now, Mike Dunham. I said to him, Mike, do it for me. One last big job. Come and finish the stations off for me, because those to me were on critical path. So anyway, cut to the chase. Sorry, it's a bit of a long story, but it was nowhere near finished. We drove that to the finish line every single day. It was an obsession of mine. I had Mark and his 3 key direct reports report to me every single day for 2 years. Even on the weekend, Mark did me an update. Every day during the week, we had an 0800, I think it was 0800 call, where I wanted to know in no more than 23 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds, has anything cropped up that you need to elevate to me? I want to know within 24 hours, such that we can do something about it. And we were fixated on having it ready for the Queen's Jubilee. Thank goodness we did, not least because, obviously after the Jubilee, then the Queen, rest in peace, died something like 100 days later. Had we not had that Elizabeth line open for when the Queen's Jubilee took place and when Her Majesty passed, TfL would have been rightly castigated. But it's the one time, Richard, if you allow me to be a bit self-indulgent, it's the one thing I'll say in my career. If I hadn't got involved and driven that, we would not have opened by the Jubilee. No way. It had to be driven to the finish line, and it had to have specific interventions, which we took. It was a team effort. Don't get me wrong. Mark did a great job, and he's moved on to greater things. Good luck to him. He's taken on HS2.
Yeah.
But as a team, we worked really well. Mark did a fabulous job for me, but we drove it to the finish line every single day.
It's an amazing achievement. And I remember seeing those pictures of Her Majesty, the Queen, opening it. And obviously you were there and the team were there. And I remember thinking at the time, gosh, I'm delighted, but a little bit surprised, but mainly delighted. And hearing that story makes perfect sense. But it wasn't the only big issue. You talked about the funding challenge. I mean, that played out across the media over the same period. I mean, that was not a straightforward challenge, was it, to convince those that needed convincing?
No, absolutely. And again, I often seem to walk into not only challenging operational situations. I like to go into a difficult job, right, and take decisive action to get stuff done. I also seem to end up caught in the middle in difficult political situations. In New York, it's well publicized. Governor Cuomo did not get on with then Mayor de Blasio. Well, there wasn't exactly the best of relationships between the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, then Prime Minister, and the Mayor Sadiq Khan. I think partly also because Sadiq was the successor to Boris, so there's always that slightly awkwardness about, are you carrying on my legacy, or are you adversely impacting my legacy? So also the other thing is, and obviously each commissioner faces their own challenges. Some have had the benefit of the same party being in City Hall as in Number 10. Well, mine were opposites. I had a Labour mayor trying to persuade a Tory government to give TfL money. And it was toxic, if I'm honest. And so we ran this 2.5-year battle to get TfL the funding it needed to survive. And we ultimately prevailed. We had a series of funding deals. Some of them were ludicrous. They were like 10-day extensions. But I was fixated with my team on getting a long-term deal before I left. And actually what we got was a longer-term deal. We got something like an 18-month deal. Now, we wanted ideally 5 years, but realistically, we were never going to get it. But we ultimately got it. And I should say on the record, every penny of that $6 billion that we got from central government, I really appreciated. And I made a point each time. I totally stayed out of the politics. If the mayor wanted to make comments about the way in which the funding went, that's his prerogative. He's the mayor. On the record, I'll say it again, was very grateful for every penny that we were given. It was hard fought. We progressively rebuilt the finances and set TfL up now under Andy Lord's leadership, on the path to becoming financially self-sufficient. So that was a real achievement. Uh, I said earlier in the podcast that London Transport in the war had a poster, a famous poster actually, that says London Transport kept going, obviously meaning kept going through the Blitz. As a motivational tool, I asked the museum to create a modern version of that. So instead of having an old 38 tube stock and an old trolley bus and an old bus, we had one made up with modern vehicles, and it said Transport for London kept going. And the difference this time was kept going through COVID. I'm immensely proud of TfL staff. They, in some cases, literally gave their lives for that organization. We lost people, but TfL kept going through COVID. We never gave up. I'm very proud of having led TfL through its darkest hour, and the fact ultimately we saved TfL. We being the team, because it was a team effort, but we saved TfL with that funding deal. And I think we also saved TfL by his reputation by having the Elizabeth line open for Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee, and then obviously ultimately for her funeral.
I remember hearing the news you were leaving, and I remember thinking, "Oh no, not now." I mean, it felt early and it felt sudden. Why? What was the reason? I mean, do you know what I mean? It just felt suddenly,
Sure.
literally quite sudden.
Yes. It felt sudden, partly because it was announced in September of 22 and I left in October. But there was a very simple, practical reason for that. I was on 6 months' notice.
Right.
I actually gave my resignation to the mayor after the Elizabeth line opened, and I gave it to him, saying to him that I actually wanted to really end my public service career. I mean, I now work for Amtrak. I'm not a public servant. Public service career on a high, and there is no greater high than the one we experienced when Her Majesty graced us with her presence and opened the Elizabeth line. That is the ultimate honour to meet Her Majesty the Queen, which was a magical day that I'll never forget. But I wanted to finish on that high. But I said to the mayor, "Here's 6 months' notice. I think we should," and he wanted this as well, "we should keep this under wraps." Why? Because we still had the small matter of the funding deal to sort out. And I didn't want to be a lame duck in front of the DfT, who might have then thought, well, there's no point in dealing with him, he's leaving. So we kept it under wraps. And I think that probably cost me personally. I'll take it for the team. I don't think that endeared me maybe to some board members who felt blindsided, but my boss was the mayor, and that's what we agreed we would do. But why did I leave? Ideally, Richard, I'd like to have done at least another year. But after 34 years of transport, but also now this year, 30 years of marriage to my dear wife, with the exception of the move from Australia to Toronto, we have done what I wanted to do. And I really felt it was time to put Ali first. She was mainly still in the States, so I wanted to be with her. And she and I, for that matter, we both really wanted to resume our life in the US. And I was offered a green card. You only get offered once. You don't really get offered twice. If you're offered it, you have to take it up within 6 months. So that was also a factor. If I turn it down, I'll probably never get offered again. So I did resign. It was a very hard decision, but here's my take on things, and other people can judge me. It's for others to judge, but here's my view of the world. It's not how long you're in a job, it's what you deliver. And I promised the mayor those two things. We will get out of COVID. We will rebuild the finances. We will rebuild the morale. We will rebuild the ridership, all of which were done. Morale, every week at TfL, I used to go around with someone from our comms team and visit different parts of the massive TfL empire, where I'd make a little video. I'd go to a bus garage, for example, and interviewed the local manager and say, how are you coping with COVID, and et cetera, and showcase what they were doing, which would then be put on our intranet. And then I would update everyone on, here's what's happening with the budget, and here's what's happening with the Elizabeth line, to keep the company's morale up. It was rock bottom. I had to do that. So there were lots of reasons for wanting to go, but I'd also promised the mayor before I leave, we will get that longer term deal. Tick, we got it. And we will get Bond Street open. Tick, that happened the very day I left. The other thing I promised him was I'd also we'd achieved the opening of the Elizabeth line through the central section, but there were two more phases left to go. One was running from the east through the tunnels to Paddington and from the west through the tunnels to Abbey Wood. And that actually happened the weekend after I left. It was all lined up. I knew it would go fine. And then there was one last phase, which is join it all up together. Andy Lord dealt with that. But I'm very proud of what I did. I do have some regret that it wasn't longer. I'd love to have been there, 3, maybe 5 years. But for a mixture of reasons, that's why I left. And again, I was very humbled by what people said when I left. The deputy mayor said something to me, Seb Dance, really decent person. This resonated with me. He said, his citation was Andy Byford is an exemplary public servant. That I really appreciated that. That
That's
meant a
nice.
lot to me.
Yeah, that's
Just
nice.
those 3 words.
Yeah, that is really nice. No, it was a shock, and you were and are missed. I can tell you that. But you're now over in the US. We've almost coming to the end. You're now at Amtrak. It's an interesting role, this, because you're not the big boss now.
No.
You're running a hugely important program. I mean, the US is having a bit of a renaissance with high speed, but it's not. It's a bumpy road. So the Californian project, I think, is hugely over budget. The one that you're looking at is meeting with some quite strong and well organized opposition. So talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities on high speed and how it must be actually, not ultimately being the guy where the buck stops.
Yeah, sure. Very good question. When we first came here, I took 6 months off actually, because in my time at TfL, 2.5 years, I only had 1 week's proper holiday because there was so much to do. You just couldn't take time off. We needed to get the various things done. So I was kind of exhausted actually, and I took 6 months off and also considered, what do I want to do? I was offered by a number of headhunters, come and run Boston, come and run various other transit agencies. I wanted to do something different. Could have gone into consultancy. The thing that caught my eye, Amtrak reached out to me, and what could be more American than Amtrak? It's Americana writ large. These big honking trains going up from, like Chicago across the west. These fabulous names: the California Zephyr, the Empire Builder, the Southwest Chief. So the role that they offered me was to head up. And again, it's back to that building your career, right? So I've run the 3 largest transit systems in 3 continents. This is a national role, and it was created for me. It was, but picking up on other people's good work. It was to oversee hopefully the development of a high-speed network for the US. The US being the absolute outlier in the world that it really doesn't have true high-speed rail. We do have the Acela service on the Northeast Corridor, about which we're very proud. It's a high-speed train, but it doesn't run over dedicated infrastructure, so it has to keep slowing down to go around curves and through old tunnels, etc., etc. Yes, there is some stuff underway. The slightly troubled California project, and Brightline, a private operator, are now breaking ground in the Nevada desert to build a high-speed route between Vegas and LA. But my job is to develop a high-speed strategy for Amtrak. Watch this space; it's about to be published. 2, to act as a repository for all things high speed in Amtrak, and 3, to take carriage of a particular project, which I think is really exciting, which was already being looked at when I arrived, but it's now my responsibility, namely a high-speed route between Dallas and Houston, 240 miles, upon which we want to import, if we can get a Buy America waiver, the legendary Japanese Shinkansen bullet train. So we'll see. It's not a done deal yet, but we're giving it a real go. But of course, as you say, the job is very different. And I describe it as there's sort of pros and cons. On the one hand, I'm not going to deny I miss the buzz of being the boss. And not being the boss can be frustrating. I'm having to relearn how to use photocopiers or use the most up-to-date version of PowerPoint, because I just haven't had to do that for years. If my team saw me heading towards the photocopier, my wonderful team at TfL would come running after me and say, no, 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 Commissioner, let us do that. And so on occasions it can be frustrating, but equally, Richard, it's liberating. You must have found that when you gave up your very high pressure, high profile jobs. It's liberating in that, one, I'm not I don't have that go to jail card that I've carried for years. I don't have that 24/7 pressure. I don't really have the political pressure, although this job, as you said, has challenges.
Yeah.
Uh, but I don't. I can focus on a single thing. Will I never go back into the sort of the big roles? We'll see. But I'm very proud to work for Amtrak. It's an amazing organization. This Dallas job is not, as you said, without controversy, though. People love it. The citizens of Dallas and Houston want it. People in the rural hinterland are opposed to it. So it's going to take quite the effort to get A, the funding, B, the political will to get the train, and C, to hopefully amicably overcome the opposition to make it a reality.
And I can imagine that you're already out doing what in this country we would probably call the village, the village hall, the town hall meetings, to do exactly that and convince the people that even though it's going to be going through, not necessarily stopping at, it's still a good thing to have.
Yes, and that is difficult. I was invited by a group called Texans Against High Speed Rail, which is fairly unsubtle as to what they believe, to come. And they said to me, "Will you come and see us?" And they cited some address in rural Texas. So I took someone with me because I wanted to make sure I wasn't misquoted. And we turned up at this beautiful ranch house. It looked like something off Gone with the Wind. And I have to say, although I was expecting, to be I don't know, met with a bit of a hostile reception, of people with guns and chased around a field by longhorns cattle. Not at all. They were charming, wonderful, decent Texans. They were very, very polite and charming with me. But they do have genuine concerns. So somehow you've got to thread the needle. Somehow you've got to try to get a situation where we can achieve the benefits that I believe that this project would deliver for all Texans. But equally, you can't just ride roughshod over people. We've got to try and find a way to acquire the land in an amicable fashion, and in a way which we have committed to, that doesn't create a Great Wall of Texas, that actually provides pass-throughs for vehicles, for animals to still be able to move about. That's not going to be easy. So it's not a done deal, and it will certainly take all of my British charm to make it a reality.
It's fantastic. Look, I know you're incredibly loyal. You live the job of the moment, and that's absolutely brilliant and inspiring. You said a thing a few moments ago, though. I'm just going to go back to you said, maybe big job again. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, which was quite a tease. You're not yet 60, so you're a young man. There's loads more to do. We got some real challenges in the UK here in terms of sorting out a network that is not performing to where it needs to be. Could you ever see yourself sort of stepping back over this side of the pond?
I don't know. I mean, it wasn't meant to be a tease. I'm very, very proud to be an Amtrak employee, and I'm very honored that Amtrak asked me to do this. So I like to be loyal to my organizations. Yeah. But I suppose in life you've learned never say never. I mean, there are downsides to being the other side of the pond. My dad, is 86, and I feel guilty about being away from him. My sister lives close by. I have a Zoom conversation with him every couple of days. But so I missed him. I missed the football, obviously, going to Argyle, etc. But it would take something really persuasive to get me to leave Amtrak. I love Amtrak, and it's my absolute intention to finish my career at Amtrak.
Brilliant.
So never say never, Richard, but I'm happy here. We're happy in the US. We bought a beautiful home in St. Petersburg, Florida. I work in Washington, D.C. I'm riding around on Amtrak. I just rode the Crescent from DC down to New Orleans. I'm very much enjoying living in the States, and I love everything about it, to be honest. But I guess I'm not trying to be coy here. I'm not going to be as absolute as say, no, absolutely not, no way. Let's see what pans out. This high speed gig may not work out. I took the job knowing it might not pan out, but it would take something very, very special to make me want to change course.
Well, I have to tell you, whatever else, the weather in Florida, definitely, it's a bit like, I love your story about sitting in the office in Croydon and thinking, Croydon, Sydney, Croydon, Sydney. Yeah, I completely get that. And the weather's an awful lot better where you are. Andy, that has flown by. I have to say that has absolutely flown by. I've never thought that we would cover so much ground, but there was so much ground to cover, and it's been absolutely superb. I'm really hoping that even though you are based over in the US, the good news is that Plymouth Argyle and Blackburn Rovers are still in the same division next year. It was jolly close, but they have quite managed it. So who knows whether it's at Home Park or Ewood Park, maybe we'll get to do that. I wish you all the best with Amtrak. It's a wonderful company. It couldn't be more iconic. I totally agree. And
it's fabulous.
High speed in the US would be an amazing thing to deliver. But Andy Byford, thank you so much for your time. That is incredibly generous of you. And it just leaves for me to say, we wish you all the best. And once again, thank you so much.
Well, Richard, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to do this over 36 years, and any success I've had is down to my teams. It's always been a team effort. It's been a lot of fun. I'm very proud of my career, and I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've been given. So we'll see where it takes us. I'm hoping at the moment that my last day on the job would be stepping off a Shinkansen in either Dallas or Houston on the first day of revenue service. At that point, Richard, I'll say my work here is done. Off to the nearest bar.
What a wonderful point to leave on. We wish you all the best. If anybody can make that happen, Andy, it'll be you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers.
Appreciate that. Thank you.